today we have Adam Hurd, who's from 973, the Greybots. If you guys don't know the Greybots, they won the 2019 Houston World Champs as Alliance captain. So that's pretty cool. Today, Adam's gonna talk about simplicity in FRC designs and robots. Without further ado, Adam, take it away.
Cool. Thank you for that introduction. So to expand on that a little bit, I copied the slide one-to-one off Karthik's presentation. I've been doing FIRST 16 years. There's an asterisk there because I actually did it a little bit in middle school before then, but I didn't really contribute much and wasn't really a good team member. So I don't really count those years all that much. So like 2004 was my first real season in my mind. I was on 294 in high school. I didn't put that on this slide. The bulk of my time was spent, as the lead mentor for 973. Moved up here with my family right before Champs 2019. In that time, we were pretty successful. We also had a good run of being marginally successful, and a lot of what you're going to see today is inspired more by the results of poor decisions and trying to learn from those that later led to success, and not so much from first principles on its own. In that time, to really highlight it, we won Champs 3 times. That was awesome. Number 1 seed at Champs 3 times. That was awesome too. Those weren't the same years though. One of those years we seeded first and then totally blew it. So there's some lessons out of that one. I moved up here to join what at the time was Oris Health, where I'm sure you all know Travis Hugh and many others work at. Now we're part of the J&J family, giant organization. Last season I kind of part-timed it with 2D4, and just a couple weeks ago I signed on with 2135, and I'll be splitting my time there. If you look down here, this is Victoria. So this is, she was just under 2 at this time in the picture on the left, and she's actually sitting in our 2019 robot, like she's not on the ground at all. This is her a couple weeks ago with some Hexbug toy. These are my 2 dogs. Before we had Victoria, the dogs were a really big deal. Now they're kind of second-class citizens. Also, the door for that crate is open. Like they did this on their own. We didn't put them there together. I don't know why they're doing that, but and little trivia fact, Titan is named Titan after our 2011 robot. I got him like a month after Champs. So we won Champs that year, and then we named dog after him. And he's throwing up behind me right now. So that's great. Purpose for the presentation. So I've never given this as like a single presentation before. This is a lot of curriculum I kind of worked with the 973 students with in the fall of a couple years. So you're kind of the guinea pig and trying to put this into like a 1-hour speed run. But what we're trying to do here is a couple different methods for figuring out like what is the simplest robot you can make for the level of competitiveness that your team is shooting for. For 971, I'm sure that's like being a top 10, top 25 team. But for others, that might be a lower goal, and there's some differences there. It's broken into 5 sections that aren't exactly contiguous, and that's kind of coming from like taking a fall of content and trying to put it into one presentation, but I think it kind of flows in order here. So we're going to reference some other workshops that are kind of the gold standard and review some main themes and core concepts coming out of there. Trying a new thing here where we're going to look at like what does simplicity really mean, and what are some metrics you can use to try to like quantify how simple robots are. It's not perfect, but it's a starting point, and I'm curious to see where that goes. Another thing we're going to do is it can be really powerful to reference all of the historical data that exist in these previous games. So we're going to look at how you might use that to assess a game at kickoff. That is a typo. That should say iteration over season. So we're going to talk about kind of what is the strategy for changing your robot over the course of the season. I think we're way far away from the days when you really had to get a robot right when you put it in the crate, which was a long time ago in itself. And now, as part of your kickoff day design decisions, you should be aware of the fact that you really can change that robot over the course of the season, and that affects some of the decisions you're going to make. And then we're going to try doing some case studies, which is something I did a lot with the 973 students, and that's where we're going to look back at some previous robots and try to learn some lessons from those robots so you can better calibrate what you think a robot might need to do after looking at a kickoff. And feel free to interrupt at any time with questions and that sort of thing. I think I only have like 37 slides, so the more you ask in real time, the more we can stretch this out. So getting into other workshops, there's two that are, really the gold standard. I believe Karthik did, this one-to-one or a variant of this first one, for this group in the last month or so. And this is great. He's done it a whole bunch of times. I couldn't find what I think is his most recent version. So I have a video filmed in the audience from 2019 champs. And then I have either PDF or YouTube link, I forget, from one he gave in 2015. The content's pretty similar though. Just his anecdotes get a little better with time. And then Mike Crosetto on 1678 gives a pretty similar but slightly different presentation. Mike's weaves in a little more practical advice since Mike's a mechanical engineer and Karthik's more of a strategy guy, but they're both really good. I would recommend you supplement those. Mike has a really good one on goal setting. I actually watched it for the first time a week or two ago. And I'd been aware of it for a year or two, and I wish I'd watched it sooner. So there's a bunch of really good lessons in there for how teams should set goals and what that really means in FRC. And then Karthik kind of has an extension of this upper presentation that's more focused on, scouting and match strategy, obviously. And it's all good stuff in there. And he's a great storyteller. He's got some fun points in there. To rip out something from Karthik's presentation, the first one I was referencing, he has this golden rule he puts in there that, everyone comes away from that presentation and, agrees with the point he's making, but, you might struggle a little bit with how you get there. And that's what we're going to talk about after this slide. But to summarize his rule, every team's going to have an arbitrary number of these arbitrary resource points based on the number of students you have, the skill of those students, your machines, your mentors, your money, all that stuff. And in this example here, the team has 30. You're going to be better off if you spend those on 3 systems that are going to, perform at a 10 out of 10, perfect, versus, trying to do too many things and make a bunch of systems that are not tuned in and well optimized. And, I want to reiterate, no one ever disagrees with this point when it's presented like this, but, a good deal of FRC disagrees with this point with their actions and the decisions they make on kickoff day. I think for everyone who's seen a season or two, we can probably all agree that most teams probably chronically overextend and try to do too much. So that's what we're going to try to focus on coming out of this. So this is a little bit of a rambly slide, but it's kind of an extension of the previous. Once again, everyone agrees being simple is really good and great. I spent a couple of years running the team where we were not simple and we did all this crazy stuff, even though we thought we were being simple. So you just got to hit a point where you drink the Kool-Aid and believe in the benefits of simplicity. And what we found really in the last couple of years in 973 is I can't stress enough, one of the number one benefits is just having less decisions to make, which sounds kind of crazy and counterintuitive, give yourself less options and then therefore you're more competitive. But, anything that you're going to field in a match, you really want the driver, the robot, the software, the strategy team, everyone to be at 100% and ready to do that. And the more features and functions and strategies and stuff you have on the table, the more time your team is going to have to spend to make sure all of those things are ready to field in a match, which is expensive. If you do less things and literally have a robot with less features, you've already set yourself up to better implement all those things. So depending on if you follow us or not, and I think Karthik references this in that 2019 strategy talk I linked, but 973 kind of famously, or semi-famously, not famously, actually removed the ability of a robot to reach the top of the rocket in 2019. We had it done. The robot was done. We could reach the top of the rocket. There was no technical issues with it. But we pulled it primarily because then our quals match strategy and our limbs match strategy became the same. And both of those were score as many points as you can. We didn't have to practice this optimal rocket route and then also practice a point maximizing route, because in a lot of matches, going for the rocket wasn't necessarily the maximum points. And that seems kind of silly and crazy, especially after we had all of the sunk cost of, putting all that in there and getting everything made and everything solved. But it worked out really well for us. And then I guess to kind of blow up my own analogy, we got to champs and, in an effort to seed first, we started strategizing ways to split the rocket with other teams in our matches. They would just do high, we would do middle and low, but we'll ignore that point for the sake of this analogy. So I don't know. This is a slide that, like, if I presented it to myself when I was younger, I'd be like, yeah, that's great. Go simple. That's not really talking about me, whatever. But after going through a couple seasons, 2017 and 2019 especially, where a robot really couldn't do all that many things and everything worked and the pit crew was ready and the code was ready and, we were just great the whole time. Um, it was nice. It was not stressful, and the team was a lot more competitive because of it. So, I mean, I could ramble on the slide for like 3 hours for the whole night. It's good stuff. And you either get it or you don't, unfortunately. Kind of another axis to look at Karthik points is, every robot can be abstracted out to like a really simple definition of the architecture on a whiteboard. Like, you got the drivetrain, you're like, oh, we have the arm with the pivot, we got the shooter going this way. And at that level, you could say, hey, if all these robots are perfectly executed, how good could they be? One robot's going to be 150 points good, another will be 200 points good, or whatever. Most teams actually don't compete at that level of their architecture, though. Like, they in theory have concepted a robot that can do all this stuff, but in practice, they don't usually get there. There's a couple teams, 330 here being one of them, that do an incredible job of like drawing a robot architecture on the whiteboard that first day, that if you assembled a panel of first experts would probably say like, that robot cannot be competitive this year. It just doesn't have enough things on it and it doesn't have enough functionality. But because they compete at like 100% of the capability of that architecture, they're often just wrecking people. Like 330 has a boatload of number one seeds, probably more than all but 10 teams. They've won champs twice now. They've been close a bunch of other times. They're killers. 2056 is another great team in this category. I think 2056 bites off a little more than 330 does. They're a little different team dynamic, have a little more resources, but same thing. 2056 usually doesn't have a lot of the fancy features you'll see on elite teams in any given year if you really dig down and look at them. But their robots work at 100%. They're always ready to play. Week one events, they'll usually have like all the different relevant auto modes you would want for any given year, where more commonly you'll see like, a lot of elite teams have just one or two in that first week because they don't need all of them. And then they save the rest for champs. Like, 2056 is usually right there from the get-go. And that's another point where like everyone agrees that's how you should do it. But, with the decisions and actions they take at kickoff, they're not usually agreeing with it. I meant to draw a graph for this, but I was struggling to fake the data in Excel to make it look nice. If let's say your team can afford a robot that's 100 points good. That's how many arbitrary combo resource points you got. And you draw a robot on the whiteboard that only cost 80 points to make. You're going to make that robot. It's going to be great. And then you got 20 points left to kind of fix like whatever you missed, or practice that much more, or just not even spend. But if you aim and try to make a robot that costs like 120 points, so that same 20-point delta, and these are obviously all funny numbers, that robot will probably perform way worse than the robot that you could have made for 80 points. I think if you look at some of the first half of the last decade for 973, like this was us. We made overcomplicated robots with incredibly high ceilings, never came close to realizing them. A lot of the years that we were far more competitive, we made robots with significantly lower ceilings, but we competed at a much better level out of the gate. This last bullet point here is kind of a bullet point to me, like 8 years in the past. We did this really bittersweet thing that you guys do as well, of going to an off season in November, right before kickoff. And one of the worst things you can do there is take your robot from last year that was too complicated and finally have it running really well and go kick ass at that event. And then you just put this memory in your mind of like all of those design decisions we made last year that were potentially too complicated and overreaching were validated because we got that robot working and it was great. And you don't necessarily assess it fairly and say, hey, we actually should have had that robot competing at that level for championships. And by not having it ready for championships, we were actually worse and we should have made a simpler robot. So, I've not necessarily directly, but like subconsciously, we've definitely fallen for this a bunch. I've seen other teams do it as well. So be aware of that. Opportunity cost. I feel like I could do another presentation on like the 10 buzzwords of economics and how they pertain to FRC. And the 973 students can tell you I overuse them way too much. This one's my favorite one. And people in FRC really struggle with this because they think like, if they made something, therefore all the decisions that went into that are validated. But For those that don't know, haven't taken, I guess, senior year economics at this point, everything you're doing is something else you're not doing. So your time, your resources, et cetera, you can't spend them in two places at once. So, I think it's pretty common to see teams do, this isn't necessarily the greatest example for your group, but like a custom drivetrain. And they get it done, week 4 or 5, and they go compete and they're fine. They're not great. And because the drivetrain wasn't necessarily an issue, they never really go back and assess, like, what if we had taken all of the resources our team spent on that custom drivetrain and instead used it on other things? Either doing like a configured off-the-shelf drivetrain or doing a kit-apart drivetrain, and then freeing up, presumably your most talented students are doing that drivetrain design. Now they're designing prototypes and helping, that iteration happen. You're tying up machines to make that custom drivetrain. Now that can make, parts earlier in the season to get your robot done, or they can make those prototypes better or whatever. I don't know that this audience is the best one to make this next point too, but I think you see this a lot with custom vision solutions too. Like for 99% of teams, the limelight is just inarguably the right answer of what you should do. Some teams can do 7 cameras and have it be fine. And I'm not going to tell you guys you can't do that. So that point doesn't work for you. But the theme is definitely there. Be really aware of everything you do is something else you're not doing. And just because you did something and it worked well, and maybe even it scored a lot of points in matches, that doesn't necessarily mean that was the optimal decision if you fairly assess everything in hindsight.
Maybe an anecdote to add, Adam. Buddy climbing this last year, I think, fit this pretty nicely.
For 2020, you're saying?
Yeah, 2020.
Yeah,
like the cost to prototype it, even just prototype it or build it or package it, all that is massive potentially. And we didn't actually see a bunch of teams do it out in the season. And so you just spent a bunch of resources trying to do this thing that didn't turn out to be all that effective.
Yeah, and I've got a slide later that kind of talks to that exactly. So that's a great analogy, and I missed it on that slide. So thank you for bringing that up. Cool. So this next section is something I've never really put into slides and like presented cold to an audience of 50 people. So if I fall flat, I'm sorry, but I've done all of this as an exercise with 973 students, looking at our own robots, looking at other teams, and trying to help break them down into like some sort of system of, getting a gradient of like how complex or not complex a robot is. Because, I'm sure you've watched a couple of the presentations out there, at least some of you, and they'll say things like have less degrees of freedom, or do less on your robot, or like pick one part of the game and be really good at that. And, maybe that was really good advice to give in like 2006, but I think we're pretty far past that in FRC being a good way to look at things. Like there's some years you can pick one thing in the game and be good at it and win champs. And there's other years where you have to do like 3 or 4 things in the game to even make a lens. And so obviously like picking one thing in the game is not a great way to decide that. And then, even degrees of freedom, like your 2016 and 2018 robot, not actually a crazy number of degrees of freedom, but if we assembled a panel of FRC experts, they would say those were pretty complicated robots. So there's more to it than just like, how much is going on. Also, these are all themes. Like I don't want this section of slides, especially with, you guys being the team famous for doing like all this stuff that other teams can't do, to come across as like, if you do these things, you're wrong and you're going to be worse because of it. No, it's more just like a framework to look at, more complex versus less complex. Your team obviously has a lot of resources to spend on these different things. So, it's all about just, trying to quantify and figure out like where that knee in the curve is of where you should make trade-offs and maybe skip features or that sort of thing. Also, of everything I present tonight, these will probably be the least clear. So, please jump out there and ask questions, because if you're thinking it doesn't make sense, okay, we got 50 people on the call, at least 49 or 48 other people are thinking the same thing probably. So at least for making things approachable for the 973 students, I would really tie things back to architecture, like that really basic whiteboard sketch you draw the robot the first day. And that's really your first opportunity. And sorry, to put this in context better, this is all built on the outputs of those presentations from Karthik and Mike. And I should have had a slide to that. If you watch those presentations, one of the things they stress is you should come out of kickoff and have a list features that you're prioritizing for your robot to do. Things like drivetrain, acquire game piece, lift the game piece, shoot the game piece. that sort of thing. So we're assuming we have all that. And now we're talking about like, how do you do that with a robot architecture? So when you're drawing that robot on the first day, you know, especially in the last decade or so, we've seen it be pretty cool to make these really integrated robots. And you'll hear the phrase utility arm, and a utility arm isn't necessarily the only type of robot that's really integrated, but making a really integrated robot like that is pretty hard, and it's pretty expensive resource-wise. So, you know, that's going to be on the more complex side. You know, there's a simpler take, and, you know, maybe shooting robots weren't the best ones to show here, but, you know, this robot down here, if you zoom in, and there's some great YouTube videos, if you go to 1241's YouTube channel where they show like each of these features in isolation, then they show the robot coming together and they all just work in sum. If you have a robot architecture that's like way more separable, probably a better example would be like a roller claw on a wrist on an elevator. Like you could really swap out those features without affecting the other ones all that much. If you have a architecture that's pretty separable, like you can iterate and solve all those features in isolation. And it's really about just solving each one of those. Like the actual integration and packaging of everything is far less critical. Then there's another key point in this bullet point down here, and your 2019 robot is a great example of this, of when you draw that architecture on the whiteboard, is that made of like known good FRC systems where like you can Google and look at Chief Delphi and pull up Blue Lines and find examples of everything on that robot already existing. You know, for like most 2019 teams, it's like, yeah, drivetrain's easy, elevators easy, wrist easy, and now we're just making a more different roller claw probably. And then we'll have some grabby thing for the hatch, and that's kind of new, but not that crazy. You know, your group going with the suction cup, like that's new. You know, you could argue there was a little bit of suction cup stuff in FRC, but you know, it wasn't really a known good solution that you could just guarantee, like we drew it on the whiteboard and we're going to be able to make that work. So, you know, there's, if your robot architecture requires you to invent something over the course of build season, you know, that's on the more complicated side. Not necessarily wrong, once again, just that's the theme. This next one I think has gotten really cool once again in the last, you know, probably half decade. And the way I'd always break it down for the 973 students is that priority list that, you know, comes out of the Karthik presentation. That's really your strategy. Those are like the discrete game task you're doing. So we want to score high in the rocket. We want to score gears. We want to hang, whatever the things are. And I totally misuse this phrase because it's not tactics, but I would always call them tactical features. That's where you kind of put these modifiers on there. Like it's been pretty cool to have your intake opposite the shooter for the years where that makes sense for either the cycles or your auto. Or, you know, maybe your intake can swing around and score both ways, which you guys could do that 2019, right?
Yeah, we could not intake from both sides, but we could score from both sides.
We could get discs from both sides from the human player, but not balls from the ground.
Cool. For 2019 and 2018, you know, there was merit to getting both robots, you know, either hung from the bar or on the top platform. You had the decision to make of like, am I going to try to compromise with another team and we'll both bring our independent features and do this? Or like, am I going to have a system to lift a partner up to do that thing? These features, you know, especially in the last couple of years, I think it's pretty common to look at kickoff and go like, not only do we need to do all these things, but we need to do these things better than everyone else. How are we going to do them better than everyone else? We're going to have all of these optimizations. And it's really tempting to list all of these and say like, these are must-haves. And pretty quickly, you've over-constrained your robot to be like pretty darn expensive. So there's some teams, 2056 is one I love the reference. I think they're on like 20% of the slides here. They almost always skip like all but one or two of those tactical features in any given year. So like this last year, they made a robot that a lot of people would say is like a couple years out of date. Like there's nothing special on this robot. They don't have the ability to pick up from the ground. They can't score either way. They didn't have a turret or a wrist that, you know, or I guess more like azimuth motion. A lot of teams are doing that. Like this is just an elevator with a thing to pick up disc. And they were great from practicing. 2016, they had the intake the same way as the shooter, which was like a big no-no. Their shot was blockable, so if a defender was in front of them, they couldn't shoot over them. There was, you know, arguments both ways in that one. You know, 971 and both myself really drank the Kool-Aid that you needed an unblockable shot, so we designed for that. They didn't have any sort of nice, fancy mechanism to go through all the various defenses. If you go and, you know, look at video of that game, they would drive up to these barriers, and they would lower this intake and put a little drawbridge down, and then they would drive over, and like that was a little difficult for the driver, but they were able to make it work with practice, and they were really good. They actually were a penalty away from winning champs that year. Having skipped a lot of these tactical features. This bullet point here is one that we really struggled with in the earlier half of this last decade, but have done a much better job in the more recent half of 973, and that's a lot of those tactical benefits, especially if you're a team that's struggling to get a couple weeks of practice before you go compete at regionals, can be solved pretty well with just practicing more. Like, even just a day or two extra practice often can be enough to eliminate some of these nice features. This was written on the wall somewhere in the 973 shop for this exact reason, but like, what would 2056 do is a great question to ask for all sorts of arguments you're having of like, should we do this crazy feature or not? Like, usually they wouldn't. Like, I've got a pretty good knack now after studying 2056 of like, I can draw their robot on kickoff, and then I still have the temptation to make something more complicated, even though I'm pretty sure I'm right about what I drew in terms of what they were going to do. Does that all make sense? This is one of the more nebulous slides, I think.
For those two 2056 examples you have there, what would you say is the one tactical feature that they did implement those years?
Ooh, that's a good question. In 2016, they had a hang. I don't know that you really needed that. Their hang also hung higher than necessary to make there was a chance for a triple climb. And I don't want to get through all the geometry of that, but as long as another robot hung after them, they could get a triple climb. They did have multiple hood positions as well. They could shoot from far, they could shoot from close. You could argue you didn't need both. 2019 I'm struggling on though, because I guess, let's say we're presenting to a team that isn't trying to compete at the level of 971. You could argue maybe you don't want a level 3 climb, and they did have a level 3 climb, but their 2019 robot was real simple. Probably one of the simpler ones they've done in the last couple of years. Because it did hatches with not an exotic feature. There was no aim alignment other than just limelight, regular ball system. They were huge. They didn't have any special provisions for double climbs or that sort of thing. And I think, once again, if we bring in this mythical panel of FRC experts, you could probably get quite a few of them to say on kickoff day, like, the robot architecture that 2056 is pursuing is good, but it's not something that could get you to Einstein and get you to win champs. And we've seen just year after year that that's wrong. And, they're winning a lot. There's a lot on this slide. And this is kind of coming back to that initial, hey, the more degrees of freedom your robot has, the more complicated it is. And that isn't exactly true. So we'll kind of walk through, some ways to chop that up a little more. So like as a first pass sort, sure, more degrees of freedom is going to trend to be a more complicated robot. But I think there's more to it than that. Because like if you look at the 973 2019 robot, we had like, I don't know, like 6 or 7 pneumatic degrees of freedom that repurposed our elevator for various things, but we only had one servo joint, and the robot was actually pretty simple because we kind of just repurposed that joint in cute ways and locked it out in different ways. So total DOF count, more DOFs you have, more complicated, but that's not necessarily all of it. Next one is servo DOFs. With this audience, not all that scary, but for a lot of teams, they can't get one servo degree of freedom to work in isolation for a season, and they're certainly not going to have good success if they're doing 2, 3, 4, 5.
Can you define servo DOF for the audience here?
Great clarification. Thanks you, Travis. So servo DOF is when you're going to have an FRC case, an electric motor controlling that joint position. You have a sensor, and your software is going to be like calling out discrete positions that you want that joint to go to. So this group is famous for it. On your intakes, on your wrists, and all that sort of thing. A lot of other teams might use a pneumatic cylinder instead and just have like a Boolean 2-position system, which, in other worlds you could get fancy in servo, but in FRC, we don't consider that servoed. And you also find systems that you could servo, a lot of FRC teams don't. So on 971, 2D4, et cetera, if you have an elevator, a wrist, whatever, you're going to have a sensor on that. You're going to be controlling that motor position. Absolutely. Like, it would just be crazy not to. But you'll find some teams where the kid, like, just has joystick. And, like, they're controlling the raw voltage for that motor and lowering it up or down. The next thing to look at, and this is really the spookiest one on the slide for me, is of all these different degrees of freedom you have, how coordinated do they have to be in terms of like A needs to happen before B, before C, or I need this thing to be in a certain position for the ball to be passed to the next thing. Those usually sound great on the whiteboard, but they're substantially more difficult to control. I know this team can do it, and I've seen numerous of your robots able to do this, but a lot of teams really struggle with this. And if you can make a robot architecture that meets all the priority list features you have, coming out of Karthik's workshop, that's definitely something to consider. And this can happen in a number of ways. So like if you look at this 284 robot here, there were some cases of like to stay in the size box, or to avoid crashing into the frame, like wrist would have to come down, then elevator would have to come up, and then like the arm would totally invert, then the elevator would come back down, and that would be pretty rough. I don't have a picture of it, but 118 in 2018 had like a pneumatic intake that would pass to an arm that was a multi-joint system, and they clearly had a state machine of like, okay, everything needs to be in state A, then we're going to go to B, then we're going to go to C, and it was like F by the time you got a game piece scored. And this team has the horsepower to make that work, but a lot of teams are really going to struggle with sequencing and putting that motion in order. This next one's actually less scary, so I should invert the two of them. Yeah.
Sorry, I just had a question.
Sure.
I'm sorry I interrupted.
No worries.
So maybe I missed the answer for the servo DOFs, but is it like essentially a degree of freedom, literally just like one motor that can rotate and one more thing you have to control?
Yeah, and I actually should have defined degree of freedom better as well. For FRC case here at least, degree of freedom is anything that moves. So a little pneumatic cylinder kicking something back and forth, that would also count as a degree of freedom. That wouldn't count as a servo DOF though. Servos are going to have that motor, you're going to have that sensor, you're going to have software controlling specific motion profiles or specific end positions you're going to.
Got it, thanks.
Last one on here doesn't scare
Adam.
me even a little bit for 971, but probably 95% of teams would really struggle if their robot architecture depended on having a servo joint, I'm going to talk with my hands a little bit here, being at a specific angle, and if they're wrong, the game piece doesn't go in the goal or they don't score. It's a much lower bar for like, I can raise my arm kind of up in this yay area, and then my driver takes it from there, versus like, I need to hit 67.3 degrees, and if I hit 67.5, I miss. Backlash will get you, poor understanding of how, motors work will get you, bad design for control will get you. This team's done it time and again. Like your 2016 robot, was that 2 or 3 joints that were affecting your shot angle? Wasn't an issue. You were nailing it, but not everyone has your skill set combined.
I would point out, Adam, that even though we can do some of these things for the rest of the students, just because you can doesn't mean you should. And so it's worth thinking about. If we have 2 designs and one is actually simpler, we should pick the simpler one if we can get away with it and it meets our requirements. And like one of the things we've seen with the sequenced game piece handoff is even though we are able to get all of the actions to happen, each one of those has a reliability and a chance of failure. And like we saw in 2018, that the handoff, when you grabbed the cube on the ground, then reached down, grabbed it, picked up, and started to play with it, that took time, and that actually reduced the reliability. So like that is something to definitely think about.
I was going to mention 2018 also on that handoff, in that, we thought that handoff would be relatively smooth, but it was, the complexity came from just, there's a lot of nuance in it, and we underestimated the interactions with the ground, and, the driver had to make sure they didn't drive backwards right away after trying to intake something, because otherwise the box would flip out. Really, a lot more complexity in there than we thought.
Yeah, and what you run into on a lot of that is, you either need to assume that one of those things happened, which means your reliability needs to be higher, or you need to give it a long time, which is, not great for speed, or now you need to start adding additional sensors to like make sure the cube came in far enough. And, that's more failure points. It's great if you hit the end of the season, you've never had any mechanical or electrical failure, but, nothing sucks more than like, I have a sensor that tells me a cube came all the way in my intake, and the driver is certain that cube is all the way in, and they're spending like 30 seconds, and the robot is not picking it up because you didn't have any way to like bypass that sensor and skip that automation, but you also needed the sensor to get the speed of automation for when the sensor wasn't broken. And that just starts a bunny trail that can get really out of hand that I'm sure you've played with some before. All right, this slide's a little more focused on the mechanical details, and I think, once again, less for a 971 team, but still, all things equal, I would take the easier road to get things done. So
just something to add in for the 971 team members. I think that, one way to view the simplicity is we still have a finite number of resources that we can spend. And we often do try to spend more than we have. So, we're not, simplicity for 971 will look different, but, by being deliberate and being good about finding simplicity on average, we get to be more targeted about where we do the fun, cool, crazy things and be able to put that in under our budget and still have a 971 relaxed average, pretty smooth going season.
Agreed, absolutely. So some of these trends, rotary motion is a lot easier to make with off-the-shelf stuff, especially if it's not like a 6-foot-long arm, but it can be a lot harder to control. So usually in FRC, we're trying to elevate game pieces. There's not that many exceptions of it. So if you're doing that with a long arm, or if it's something shorter, arbitrarily call it a wrist, as you're elevating it, you're also changing the depth of it in relation to your robot. And you're also changing the angle of it, which can complicate things. If you have multiple rotary joints stacked, now, as you're moving your more proximal rotary joint, you're changing everything about your more distal rotary joint. And that's a little more complicated to control. And you can do all sorts of math and stuff to make that work, no problem. But, prismatic or linear joints are a little harder to make. I think there's a really good COTS ecosystem now that makes that easier. And if you're a team like 971 that's made just about one of everything over the course of the years, linear systems are pretty easy to make. They're a lot easier to control. So I have an elevator that goes up and down. Like, I'm only ever changing up and down when I do that. And if I have some other actuation that is my scoring or maybe a small wrist or whatever, those motions are totally decoupled. And that is a lot easier on the driver. It's easier in the software. Next one is not quite as true as it was a couple years ago, but it's still pretty tough. The more force or energy your system has to deal with, the harder it's going to be. And there's also a certain line where systems just get pretty dangerous, and then teams need to be mature and put a lot more into that. So, like a good example there, if you go back and look at the 2014 game when teams were shooting these balls, teams were, not all teams, many teams, your team, my team, were storing a huge amount of energy in elastic mechanisms and then releasing that. And that was pretty new in FRC at the time. We'd seen it a little bit in years prior with lower levels of energy, and that was tough and that was scary. And teams spent weeks sometimes designing this like really robust and safe way to do it. And if they had done something else, they could have moved faster. A little modifier on there that makes that harder, and I'm sure Travis can attest to this. If you have a high force mechanism that you also need to like release and let free spin under load, like one of those launchers, that's even that much harder versus like just a climb where, I have my motor pull me down really hard, but I don't need to release that energy while it's loaded up. It's also a lot safer if you don't have to do that. This 469 robot on the right, it's really hard to see, but they did something that, I didn't even catch in the year they did it, and I discovered this a few years later, but I really love it. So most, but not all, of the really good teams did some sort of high energy storage with like a discontinuous release. All they have is an arm. You can't see this. I should have marked up this picture. They have an arm that they spin up with motors to like launch a ball. So that's really easy to do. There's no high force release. And then they just supplemented that with some surgical tubing that I can't tell if this is the pivot or that's the pivot over here or something. So the surgical tubing is either over-centered, so it's actually holding the catapult down, or it's at such a low lever arm that the motors are holding it back no problem. So they probably got this done like weeks earlier than a lot of the teams that did the high force mechanisms. Now that we've done this more in FRC and there's more examples we can point to, sorry if you guys can hear my dogs. It's not as bad, but still, all things equal, try to avoid high force mechanisms. This last one, yeah?
Some context for the newer students. The 2014 game was these big trackballs, a couple feet in diameter, that we were shooting half or more the length of the field.
And it was pretty cool. This last point is kind of the other end of that handoff discussion, but if you want to abstract your robot in one variable to things that are more continuous, or less continuous, it's always better if your robot's more continuous. If it's like, I have an intake that runs, and then the ball goes into my conveyor, and then I run my conveyor, and then it goes into the shooter, that's going to be easier to control, easier to debug, easier to test than if you have, I bring the intake in, and it passes the ball to conveyor, but then the conveyor, like, raises up, and it actually goes out the input of the conveyor into the shooter. That's just going to be tougher. And, like, I think probably one of the worst or best examples of a really good team making a non-continuous setup work really well and hating it the whole time. Once again, not the greatest picture. A lot of teams in this 2013 year, that's what we're looking at, where you shot frisbees out of a single stack or like out of a single conveyor, and it was fairly continuous. What TBD4 did is they brought frisbees in with a conveyor and they loaded them into like a pneumatic basket. And I remember both Shee brothers helping a lot with this. And then I don't know if you can see my hands. That pneumatic basket would raise up, and then they would shoot the disc out of it. Then it would lower back down, and then they would put one more disc in it, and then it would raise up, and they would shoot it out. And they would have to do that for each shot. And you would hear like 4 or 5 pneumatic actuations in total every time they shot a frisbee. And you could see them trying to speed it up, and then it would jam, and it would jam for the whole match. And they, back off the speed and that sort of thing. And they were fighting it the whole year. It was just terrible. And that's, a very talented group with a lot of resources. So, clearly a very expensive proposition. This last slide is another one that could be a whole presentation, and Austin could give the presentation better than me. But I think tuning is something that's overlooked in FRC in terms of, how much of that really is part of the design. What I would tell the 973 kids was, you're not fielding a robot, you're fielding a team, and kind of between robot and team, you're really fielding a system. And that system includes people and processes and software and that sort of thing. The fantasy is in the pit at events, although this is a terrible idea, you should be able to totally reassemble your robot from raw parts. Do nothing, not even download code to it. Go play a match, and every shot goes in, every tube is scored at the right height, all of that. Obviously, that's not achievable most years, but like that's what you should strive for. If you make a change to your robot, whether that's damage, someone goofed, whatever, you really want to consider, what do I need access to at an event to get my robot competition ready? Because if it's a practice field, that's really rough. I've personally experienced times where like we knew we were not likely to make our shots in the next match because we couldn't get to a practice field before the match. And that's not good. If you can get it to like a goal or something that's freestanding in your pit, that's better. Still not great, but at least you have control of that situation. A more reasonable compromise, and probably a realm that you guys are in pretty often, is like you just need to download code. That's not too bad. Swapping parts out is more along the line. A lot of teams have done mechanical adjustment for shooters. That can be a good way to solve some of these problems and make the process a little easier. I wouldn't recommend that for 971 exactly, because you hit a point where the software and the process is cheap enough, and then it can actually be a lot better and faster than the mechanical solution. But for a lot of teams, that mechanical solution is better.
I will add in there, Adam. In the past, we have actually biased towards software adjustable mechanisms like hoods and things, exactly for this reason, because it is easier for us to adjust the constant up 2 degrees than it is to go, fab something.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and like sorry, continue.
Oh, and then I was going to say, we have a concept of zeroing. So like if a sensor gets bumped or you have to take something apart and put it back together, we want to have the concept of where like straight up is. And we always work very hard to be able to reliably put the robot in that position in the pit. So we can then go tell the software, okay, this is straight up, this is elevator all the way down, this is intake all the way back, so that we can then reproduce all the motions that we created back at home.
Yeah, which leads into the point I was going to make of like, the worst thing you can do is, let's say your arm angle is controlled with the potentiometer, and that's something that's going to give you like a 0 to 5 volt signal on the robot computer. You save like, hey, 3.2 volts is where we score at. Because if you replace that pot or remount it in a different spot, like that's really hard to recreate. The right thing to do is to abstract all of your sensor inputs. And this is where like Austin really should give this whole talk to, real coordinate systems that are easy to replicate if any one part of the robot changes. So, your elevator presets are saved as height from floor or whatever. Your arm presets are angle from horizontal or vertical or whatever makes sense. Your shot presets are in, you know, RPM versus arbitrary encoder counts. And if you're like adjusting shot angle per distance, you're not measuring in like raw camera pixels or whatever for distance. You're actually getting the distance value from the camera. And, you know, so that you could change any one of these black boxes in the system and have the least amount of burden to redo everything. Another thing, and I'd love to hear some other time what you guys have done to solve this problem, is, you know, if you're tuning shots over quite a range, it's pretty common for teams to make like a lookup table of like, okay, camera says I'm 5 feet away, therefore I need this hood angle and this RPM. And 5.5 feet away, I need this one. And 6 feet away, this one. And they'll do that out all the way to like 20 feet. And what 973 is only done once, because like I would prefer not just to do this stuff at all, is, you know, we found the form of that solution at home. So like we figured out what that graph looked like from 6 to 22 feet or whatever. And then at events, we actually didn't retake all of those points. We took 6 feet, we took 20 feet, maybe we took 12 foot or something as well. And then we said, hey, we know the form of the graph. We're assuming maybe something has changed in a robot a little bit to like the whole graph just kind of shift up and down, or like kind of change pseudo slope on this polynomial fit a little bit. And we're hoping not all that much has changed, so we can just refit the whole graph with a couple data points where you're leveraging a bunch of work you did at home to have less data points to test on the field. I see a lot of teams don't do that right though, and they're on the hook to recalibrate everything in total when you get there. You also could veer the totally other way and just do crazy simple stuff. So, you know, one of the downsides, and Austin will also give this part better, of abstracting everything out into black boxes, is all those black boxes will give you different sources of error. So like if we're looking at the shooting robot up here, if we were using a camera to get distance, there's going to be some error on that signal. And the robot's not going to actually think it's exactly at 97 inches. It's going to, you know, be 97-ish, and it might even flicker with time. And we found that, you know, changing your flywheel RPM was my dogs are arguing over the bed, was bad for making shots. And, you know, that distance is going to feed into an RPM you set, and so on and so on. Everything in the solution is a little bit of error. What 973 did is we said we want one preset to tune it. And that is wherever our robot ends up when we drive and do our auto, we'll make that RPM work. And then you'll see that this goal is lit up with a flashlight. That flashlight was on a little screw we could adjust the angle of and clamp it. After we would tune our auto on the practice field, we would adjust that flashlight so that when that flashlight was, the top of it was flush with this tape, that meant the robot was at the right distance. You know, left, right, you could tell just by where the flashlight lined up. And then the balls went in, and we just had that one RPM. And like, that sounds really dumb. And even I thought on kickoff day, like, that was crazy. Like, I thought our season was hosed when we didn't have the programming infrastructure to do a more sophisticated shot routine. But we won, and we beat some really good teams on the way there. And we actually found that our accuracy in terms of number of balls that went in as a function of number of balls we fired was higher than a lot of those teams. And I think part of that is we weren't introducing additional error with all of that adjustment over distance. Sure, there were some downsides of it. We couldn't shoot from other positions and that sort of thing. But we got to take something that other teams potentially spent a couple hundred hours on over the course of the season, and likely a couple hundred hours of probably their most talented people, and it became like a weekend project for us to get that done. So I don't know that that's universally applicable year to year, but at least consider that as an anecdote going forward. I think I'm about to jump to a new section if there's any questions on this before we move on. And one day Austin will give his talk on the right way to abstract all this stuff out to be super configurable.
We actually haven't figured it out.
Oh.
We just had the massive table and kept editing it, and just like, we didn't have a good answer for that.
All right, moving on. This last one is a little orthogonal to everything else, because like it doesn't really show up in the whiteboard sketch of the robot. But it is a similar, you know, kind of scalar multiplier on going from that robot architecture to getting a robot done. I think 971 is actually in a pretty good spot for this. And what we're talking about here mostly is like, how quickly can you make that robot on the whiteboard in terms of the kind of commodity design decisions you make of like, fundamentally, how does your team usually put things together? How do you machine things? How many off-the-shelf components you're using, and that sort of stuff. And then also like, what is your shop process? You know, so on 973, our design and fabrication process was really, really well set up for 2D plates and tubes. So we would try to design everything to be 2D plates and tubes. And if we had to design that couldn't be made that way. Like, we knew it was going to take longer to work. And then that design kind of got derated a little bit because, once again, you're not fielding a robot, like you're fielding a team, and that robot tuned in, program implemented, et cetera, is what you're fielding. So like a better design finished later is not going to be as effective. I'm not going to spend too much on this today because, Travis and other mentors here can definitely answer a lot of these questions, but, do less custom. Big 3D milled parts are usually pretty expensive in FRC. Don't make what you can buy. Or if you're making stuff, at least make a lot of similar stuff. And, you're set up pretty well for this already. You're using a lot of Beck shaft. You're using the router pretty well. The router doesn't care if the plate is shaped one way or the other way or has any bonus holes or that sort of thing. So, yeah. Any questions here? Because I think I'm actually jumping to a new section now.
There's a question in the chat by Het Satasia asking, are magic numbers generally discouraged? I think it's regarding the last question about like the shooter you're talking about.
Yeah, I mean, at a certain point, you're going to have magic numbers somewhere in code some years if you haven't like fully figured out all the scales of all your sensors. But I think as long as it's appropriately labeled, it's not crazy. Austin has probably stronger opinions on that than I do.
I mean, in the end, you either have to be able to back out all the numbers from the physics, which is really hard, or you end up calibrating some of the stuff out. And it's really, it's kind of investment of time. Is it going to be easier to just calibrate it out, or is it going to be easier to work the physics out? And I think Adam alluded to some of that with backing out the function. Like if you know how your shooter is going to behave as a function of distance approximately, you know how to tweak it a lot faster. And you can either do that with a physics-based approach, or you can do it by just measuring.
That actually inspired an anecdote I really like here. So I think another way to view this is your system for editing all the necessary magic numbers is pretty important. So 2019, we went to our first event, and we had a pretty crude but effective limelight routine where nominally we aimed at the goal, but if we were too far away from the goal and we weren't angled correct to the goal, we actually kind of drove away from the goal so that we would end up more normal to it. And it was all done with like sines and cosines and fudge factors, like completely wrong, illegal control stuff. But I didn't want to do like a 3D transform and everything and like make sure our camera was precise. So it was like, I want camera to aim straight ahead and everything to be based on that. So we could remount our camera, and as long as the camera was straight, everything would work. So that worked really well at our first regional. The teams were like messaging us, asking us what the code was, and they couldn't believe it was so simple. And then it worked terrible at our second regional, and we had to slow the robot down a lot, and the driver was really unhappy, and like we couldn't explain why. So 973 still has a mentor that actually did a year up with 971 in 2016. And him and I disagree on almost everything, but we work really well together on this kind of stuff. So I talked with him and said, hey, when we show up at champs, we need our process for tuning whatever went wrong there in like dead set perfect. And I want the people tuned. Like I want to go to the practice field, and I don't even want you guys to like talk to each other. I want you to go and you're going to take a picture with the camera, then that's going to change the first thing. And then you're first going to, tune in like your linear pit of, how the robot drives forward and back. And then you're going to do your turns. Like every aspect of this, every magic number that needs to get tuned, I want you to rehearse that at home. Like I want someone to modify the robot configuration, change the lighting conditions, et cetera, at home and rehearse that, because the fact that it worked really well at our first event and didn't work well at our second event, and we spent like 3 hours in the practice field making terrible decisions on how to retune it, was really scary. And they did it. Alan and the students working on that knocked it out of the park. We went to champs and we were on the practice field for like 10 minutes and they did all the stuff and I didn't even know what they were doing. Like they had it all rehearsed really well and that shit just worked perfect. It was incredible. I guess a corollary there also is if something has a boatload of magic numbers and it works well the first time, you probably shouldn't move on. You should probably do some sensitivity studies and figure out where the margins on all that are, because you never know when something's just gonna start working terribly and you'll be unprepared to fix it. All right, now we're moving on. So totally different topic, but useful effort. And that is taking data that exists from previous years to try to estimate what teams are going to score in future games. So most, but not all FRC games have a core motion, kind of after auto, before end game, that can be broken down into a cycle. And that's just a term that was coined in FRC, I don't know when, a while ago. And it's a cycle because you go back and forth and repeat it. It's nominally this form here. You got to drive to the game piece. Excuse me. You got to pick up the game piece. You got to drive to where you're scoring. You got to align or aim or whatever. And then, especially if you're shooting a lot of game pieces or something, you have to release or fire that thing. Sometimes those last 2 bullet points are so quick that they're the same thing. Other years, like 2017 especially, they could both be pretty long. If you try to do this on kickoff day purely from memory, you're probably going to estimate, higher is kind of ambiguous here. You're probably going to estimate that robots were better than they were. So cycle times were lower and total number of cycles completed was higher. And that's often because, like, what do you remember? What did you watch 2 years ago when you were bored one day? You're probably watching like Einstein or the regional you won or that sort of thing, where everyone's great. And you're not really watching the most relevant data if you're trying to calibrate what level your robot should compete at earlier in season. So, only way to do this really is to look at historical data. Some people say you should do these like mock kickoffs with kids pretending to be robots, and you like tell them to be physically realistic and not go too fast and not go too slow. I think it's just BS. Like, if you put error bars on that, you essentially get the same numbers that if you just ask people to estimate, put on the whiteboard. I mean, doing it as a team building activity or like a de-stress thing in the middle of kickoff, sure, but I'm fine staking my reputation on no one has ever made great decisions off the kids pretending to play the game. However, people going back and looking at old games, great data there. There's only 2 ways to do it. If you're lucky enough to have all your old scouting data, and you can make mature decisions when you're interpreting that data, because obviously there's a lot lost when you go to data versus having the full context. You can do that. The other way is just brute force, and we've done this. You just watch video. You go back and you pick relevant events early in season, later in season, champs calls, champs at limbs, Einstein or whatever, first picks, captains, backup robots, etc. And you watch a lot of matches. And you don't just pick their best match that's the most fun. You got to watch like a representative data set. And you might have like a third of your team do this for a day or two, but you can get a pretty good answer out of that. And if your team's super small and it's better spent, that time's better spent doing prototyping, yeah, I would do that. Most teams have people that can't add a huge amount of value in the first couple days. If you've got 40, 50 people on the team, there's not really room for 40 or 50 people to make huge contributions to prototyping, design, et cetera, in those first couple days. But they can add a lot of value here. So I had high aspirations of walking through all the details of this. Instead, we're going to look at 2 spreadsheets, and we'll talk through it a little bit. So let's say we're looking at the 2013 kickoff, which was a game you were nominally driving back and forth. You were picking up Frisbees from a human station. You were driving about 3/4 of the field, and then you were shooting those into a goal. And you're trying to figure out what are the cycles going to be. Well, at that time, the most relevant game to reference probably would have been 2011. Where you drove, if you were doing a full human player cycle, like 90% of the field, or you were picking up these inner tubes off the middle of the field. And you could do pickups of the disc as well off the floor. And let's look at some of those stats. So I highlighted 2 teams here to separate them. So in 2011, almost everyone did floor pickup, except in this data set, this team 1503, and that's why they're green. And sorry for not having a key. In 2013, most teams did human loading, and floor pickup wasn't that common, except at least in this data set, that's 2056, and they've got their floor intake here. So if you start digging through here, you definitely see some outliers that don't add up that well. But like, if you want to cheat and just jump right to champs, you can see the trend for the teams that are seeding first, probably getting picked, and then winning the division together. This is like dead on. I mean, this is a little hand wavy because we haven't talked through like what was different year to year and that sort of thing. But this actually yielded pretty good results. And like, we did this year, and I went and checked our notes, and we were within like 20% of estimating what would happen in quals at a regional, what would happen in the limbs at a regional, champs and so on. And you can start building up fake matches of like, hey, I know in the average qual, I'm going to have a team of, yay caliber, a team that's better, a team that's great. So you can start digging into this data and be like, oh, in my average qual, I got one of these, I got one of those, I got one of these. How many discs are they scoring? How many cycles are they scoring? And this won't tell you that like, oh, you need an arm with an elevator in this kind of shooter, but it does give you some awareness of like what kind of scores you're going to see and what you're comparing yourself to. I'm now aware to start looking at the chat. TTPM, I'm sorry, that is teleop total game pieces per match. I typoed there. It should be, and this is total disc per match. Oh, sorry, total tubes per match, total disc per match. I could have annotated the slide better. I'm sorry. There's also an assumption based into this one. The scouting data was counting disc. The robot could carry 4 disc at a time. I made up 85% as a reasonable accuracy just to transpose, disc to cycles. So sorry for kind of under-delivering on this slide a little bit. But this is gold right here. If you have your old scouting data and you're able to kind of point out what's different in cycles year to year, which I'm actually going to jump ahead to a slide, you can do some really good work on that. You should also, if you want to go a little farther, build a model where you maybe kind of fudge this a little bit based on what is different about these numbers. So like you might be referencing an older year where the drive time is really, really similar. But the acquisition time, you're like, okay, we just grabbed 1 game piece and it was stupid easy. So the average acquisition time was like a second. I think this year it's going to be closer to 5 seconds. It's like, okay, great, change that number. And do that for all these with reasonable estimates, and then scale the data you have on top of that. So like, you're still estimating, but at least you're estimating on top of data versus like just totally estimating, making up. And you can get better estimates of what you think is going to happen. We did a very similar thing using 2013 to estimate 2017. We did a more complicated version because 2019 was a lot different because the cycle was so much shorter than previous years, but we estimated 2019 as a mix of, I think, 2018, 2017, and 2013, and got a range of answers that checked out. At a certain point, it's too noisy and crazy, but it's worth doing and seeing what you get. Another thing you want to correct for, because this is really easy to miss, sometimes there's a useful activity to do right outside of auto that, kind of takes time away from these dedicated cycle periods. Sometimes the end game is longer or shorter. If you notice reading the manuals over the years, they've also just changed the total match length. And some of these years are 15 or 30 seconds different than other years. And that's enough, especially if you're only cycling for 90 seconds to really change your answers. So, scale with those. I think if you're digging to really old data, and that's dangerous, it's not totally unreasonable to speed things up a little bit. If you're looking at 2011, 2012 match video, robots were a lot slower then in general than they are now. The game gets a lot faster, probably around 2013, but even 2013 to now, we've sped up. I wouldn't overcorrect this and use this as a tool with fake data to say, man, everyone's faster. We're gonna have to score twice as much as anyone thought. I'm not gonna click through and do this video, but here's a excerpt of the kind of effort we would do. So this is a video from 2011, 1503. That's this team here. Unfortunately, I could only find, also note, their average at champs was 6.4. The only good video I could find was Einstein. If you're only gonna grab one video for a team to assess a whole year, I probably wouldn't pick their Einstein match video because it's gonna be like their best match of the season and not really give you a great picture of what you'll see at regionals. But as long as you have that awareness, you can pick whatever, I guess. But I would propose just do a boatload. 2 ways to approach it. Easy way if you're trying to go real fast, crank up YouTube payback speed to 2x or 3x or whatever the max is, and just count how many game pieces they get. Ignore adjustments of time, ignore people playing defense on them or whatever. Just count how many. You want to go a little higher fidelity, I would mark every action they're doing and then pull out a time delta for each one and then average those. So hopefully you guys all go and watch this video later. You can see on average, they're driving 7 seconds to go get the game piece. And they, in general, were driving from a pretty wide open field area to a pretty constrained area. They would grab the game piece pretty quick. If you watch the video, it made sense. They had this big claw that would grab a 30-inch wide tube out of a slot. They were in an aisle that was only like 4 or 5 feet wide anyway, so it was pretty hard to miss. Their average time to traversing to scoring was 6.4, which was faster, which checks out. You're going from a narrow area to a wider area now. It's a little harder to miss. You can go a little faster. And then scoring was pretty quick, but still slower than picking up. And that also checks out. You have to score this thing precisely. And, this average, if you really dig into it and look at these numbers on the left, they had a lot of 1 seconds in here, but they had a lot of 4 seconds and 5 seconds too. And that's what drove the average up. So your median and your average weren't necessarily the same there. And then we can see, you know, they spent 106 seconds cycling. They scored 6 game pieces. For these numbers on the right, I removed these orange ones down at the bottom because this cycle took like almost the time of 2 cycles because they did have defense played on them. And I think that's fair to do a little bit of fudging like that as you're looking at stuff, as long as you're mature about it and you're not doing it in a way to win the argument and justify the design decisions that you are pushing. We'll talk about this more in a little bit. This method on the right is a killer tool for analyzing what upgrades your team should make over the course of the season. You should know before you make any changes to, you know, major robot architecture, the cost benefit of that. And if you don't know how much time you're spending in a match on the different things, there's no way you can make an informed decision. I know this team prides themselves on being super logical and making great informed decisions. So hopefully, if you're not already doing this, you'll do it going forward. Last one, another one I wish I could have spent more time and given you all these more models, but we'll just settle for a summary. You can also use previous years, like entire event data, to predict what you think standings are going to look like in future years. So we were debating in 2019, do we want to be one of those teams that like lifts up other robots? Can we do a single climb on our own? We had similar talks in 2018, and we figured we can use how successful teams were at various endgame tasks in previous seasons with some modifiers and estimates, to predict the rate people would do them in future seasons. And I didn't dig in and grab the numbers. When we were trying to use 2017 to get 2019 climbs, it over-predicted them, which is something we expected at the time, because almost everyone climbed in 2017. There's a lot more direct point value to it. You pretty much lost matches if you couldn't climb, and it was a lot easier. If you had a shaft that spun, which is about as easy as it gets in FRC, you could climb. 2018 was a lot harder climb. And I think we put some modifiers on there of like, ooh, you know, the level 3 climb both seems easier and more important than the 2018 climb. So we think teams will do it a little more. I think we said like 20% more or something. And that actually lined up pretty well. We used 2018 San Francisco and SVR data. We also could have done it just with more generalized, you know, scouting data from, not scouting data, just generalized match result data from Blue Alliance and done like all the first if we wanted. We were being lazy because we already had the data in our scouting system. And we predicted, you know, a climb rate that was like pretty darn close, within 10, 20% of what we saw at regionals that year. And we did the same thing for champs, and we saw pretty similar there. So we were able to see like, oh man, like if you have a level 3 climb, you're pretty much guaranteed top 8 because there were not all that many teams climbing successfully. You can do the same thing, and I alluded to this a little bit back, figuring out were you going to be able to complete a rocket. Our outcome from that result said that, like, you know, if teams are playing really well and FRC has gone a little faster and their technical solutions are a little better, it's not crazy for a team to maybe do 18 or 20 game pieces in this like really close uninterrupted cycle, which is, we knew was on the high side when we did that. But we saw that. I think 1323 set a record of like 20 game pieces or something. We also, you know, by looking at old cycle data, not cycle data, actual old match video and breaking cycle data out of that, that if defense was played effectively at all, you were not completing the rocket, and you might not even get more than like 6 game pieces. And you know, we also saw that. I don't want to oversell this too much. Like, this data is good and does come to good conclusions, but a lot of the conclusions you're going to find, I think, someone with really good FRC experience like Karthik, et cetera, could just do the same thing off the top of their head and predict it effectively. But the dangerous thing is if you're one of those people that thinks you're Karthik and you're not. And that's where tying everything back to data should keep things more bounded, and you'll probably make better decisions. I don't think I'm Karthik, and that's why I go with the data when we can. I heard someone on mute, so I'd love to hear whatever you
Do you have an example of a time where the data showed you something that you weren't expecting and you guys made a decision differently because of that?
That's a tough one, because I feel like, you know, even though we do all these efforts, we're still not perfect, and the decisions we make between the outcomes of these efforts and when we actually field that robot, you know, there's a lot in between. I do think we wildly miscalculated cubes on the scale in 2018, but then we also made a bad robot. So it's hard to figure out exactly the consequence of being wrong there. I thought our model showed teams would shoot a lot more and make a lot more in 2017. than we thought. And that's because, I'm always hesitant to take old data and say, man, this looks way harder. Let's really crank up the scalar on this to reflect it being that much harder. And like, we knew shooting was really hard in 2017, but I don't think we accounted for it enough in the model. And then, it actually worked out for us, but there was a time, week 4 or 5, where I feel like we had overcommitted on shooting, and the robot wasn't done. And then I really micromanaged hard for like a week and brought everything back, and it worked out and everything was fine. And I think there's a chance if we had more realistic data analysis, that I think it going totally wrong with your story, we might have actually devalued shooting in 2017 and skipped it, and then probably been less competitive. But I mean, the data might have supported that decision at the time. There were a bunch of teams that just did gears and were super competitive. I'm generally not great on the spot like this, Travis, so I'll probably in 2 days get you the perfect example of this. All right. This is a pretty short section, but I think there's a lot to it. So like I referenced earlier, we're really, really far away from the days in FRC, like potentially around when some of you were born, where if you didn't get the robot right when you finished build season, like season over, you weren't good. But now, like, your ability to change the robot over season is just as much part of the game as the robot architecture you pick on day one. So we'll talk a little bit more long-term in the next couple slides, but I would stress, I think a lot of teams do a good job of doing these kickoffs that are pretty structured and cover all the details. And I've seen yours, and they're pretty good. And you get some good outcomes of that. But then you go and start working on the robot. And you get a week later, and you've learned some things from your prototypes. Maybe different kids have seen different videos online from Chief Delphi or YouTube, or this robot in 3 days effort is like a bunch of teams doing these like hackathons, making robots real quick. And they're generally terrible because they're made in 3 days, but they still show good stuff. And I think it's pretty important to formalize, maybe at the end of that first weekend, or maybe twice a week the whole season, whatever pace makes sense for your team, of coming back and reassessing those decisions you made as a big group with the data you've got from back then. And that seems kind of silly because, a lot of teams, like, they're meeting the whole time, they're talking the whole time, they might not think they're missing that. But often the important conclusions come from, a couple rounds of that back and forth discussion. So, 973 has definitely changed course or felt, better about our decisions and affirmed them when we've stopped shop for an hour, turned all the machines off, and go, hey, here's what we decided last weekend. Here's what we learned this week from our prototypes. This is way harder than we thought it was going to be. This other thing was way easier than we thought it was going to be. We saw this robot in 3 days team make that thing that we thought was going to be impossible, like, trivial. So that's a thing. We got to worry about that now. Some smart but dumb team put something on YouTube that's like game breaking. They shouldn't have done that. They should have kept it to themselves, but they did it. So, like, we got to do it now, and all that kind of stuff. And talk through, does that change, even maybe your thoughts on how many game pieces are going to be scored in the match? And if you've changed those thoughts, maybe your total point prediction for the match is going to change. And maybe now a feature you thought wasn't necessary, you absolutely have to have because teams are better than you thought they were going to be. And what you're planning on designing isn't really better than that. And now you need something, that differentiates you. And then, obviously a big one is this last one of all that cycle data is potentially being done by, kids slaving away at home or in a different room of shop for a couple of days while, other kids are going off and doing prototypes and building the robot. If you're going to put all that energy and effort in, you should really have a good conversation about that data versus, like, sharing it in Slack or like doing a quick team update or that sort of thing. The next one is more about, how do you take advantage of the fact that you can change things over the course of the season to make better decisions earlier? I feel like if I had to pick one thing I'm personally better at in FRC than all the other things, I feel I'm better at this part. Like, I'm not the greatest designer, I'm not the greatest lead mentor, but I've got a knack for, in the years we do it right. So we've got a bunch of years in your mix where we do it terribly. So maybe I don't have a knack. I feel like I have a knack for going like, ooh, that is what's going to develop over the course of the season. And we need to follow that and bring that out at the appropriate time. One of the worst things you can do is take this big game breaking, expensive feature and design your robot around it early in season and then be wrong. If it works out, it's great, but it's a very expensive thing to be wrong about. So, to talk through this first example, in 2019, we were really debating making a triple robot climb like 1678 did, which is a big decision. You're going all in on that. Very hard to change, very hard to iterate. And we talked a lot, and we thought this would be similar. If you go back and look at the 2012 game, there's this big teeter-totter bridge. And on kickoff, we thought it'd be really difficult to get 3 robots to balance on that bridge. But by the time we hit the champs, some combination of easy-to-copy features, some drive techniques we saw from teams, some teams designed smaller robots to make it easier. We found it was pretty easy to do. And if you design some like holy grail, really difficult solution, like 118 designed this thing to hang off the side of the bridge. We actually designed and partially made the same thing in isolation. I mean, they actually finished it and brought it to an event. We canceled ours when we saw theirs was made illegal, unfortunately. That was a bummer versus some teams like literally just put a cylinder on the robot and balance. So in 2019, we decided, no, we're going to do a single level climb to start, and then we'll see where the game goes. After our first event, we were debating doing one of the fancy suction cup things like a lot of teams. But then I was getting lunch with Aaron Hill, and he was like, you know what? I think forks would be pretty good. If you could just like stick out a little finger under your robot, under your friend's robot, and they could keep you from falling off the top, that'd be easy. And I'm like, yeah, that would be really easy. So we made that for champs. It was stupid easy to do. We barely had to change a robot for it. And that was absolutely critical in us winning that year. And by delaying that as late as possible and not adding it until it was necessary and taking advantage of all the knowledge we had at the time, we got to see how every other team did it. We got to find all their part members, see all their solutions, assess the impact of those solutions to our robot before making that decision. It made that decision a lot easier. It's kind of a different story with this next round. Sometimes you have features that are an arms race. Like, it's not just that I climb or do the thing. I need to do this thing faster and better than you. But like, physics is physics. And if I do it faster and better than you, you're probably going to figure out how I did it. And then you're going to do it faster and better than me. But at a certain point, like, there's not a lot of room between how my opponent is currently doing it and the limit of how I can even do it in FRC. So there's merit to only making it as good as you need at the time you need it and saving everything for when it really matters at the end, which, sounds like really arrogant and cocky if you're not a team that's already competing at a high level, but 971 is. And, it's my understanding you guys took a pretty similar approach where you either didn't have cam grabbers at regionals or they were just like fine. And then you came to champs with, the same ones 2D4 had, and they were really good. Another example, in 2014, it was legal to block shots. You saw a couple people do it early in season. And we didn't think it was going to be that big of a thing, but then we saw a bunch of teams are really good at shooting multiple balls in auto, which freed up their partners to play defense. I know I'm totally like assuming you've all seen all these games. And I'm sorry about that, but that's the only way to get through this. We found like, it was really easy to add a shot blocker, and the game's going that way. We might as well do it. And then kind of the inverse of all that is, it's pretty easy on kickoff to say, we need this feature, and then just find out you're wrong about it. And it was never a thing. And it's way better to look back from champs and say, we didn't make that thing that we thought was super important, than like we put all this time into stuff that didn't end up being valuable. And then this bullet point here is kind of tied to that cycle one before of, we did a pretty good job of this in 2017, where we took our regional data from our first regional where we didn't qualify, it was a real bummer, and determined that we didn't need to make our shooter better out of that regional by getting this breakdown and seeing how we were going to win or lose matches. We needed better gear cycling at our regional based on that time breakdown. Like, we literally reran matches and was like, would we have won these matches if we shot better? No, it wouldn't have made a difference. So we then furthermore did some testing, and this is a little tougher because you're comparing dissimilar variables, and we played with like drive practice versus a better gear claw, and we found that just practicing more was all we needed to get our gear average up to what we needed to be effective at our second regional. And then we used that same data plus some assumptions to say, okay, we think teams are going to be doing 12 gears combined, that 4-rotor at champs. We think the third pick at champs is going to be this effective because teams are going to be 20% better at champs. Statistically, these are the kind of teams that get in. The teams that are that percentile, we're averaging this many teams at regionals. And we found we could actually get worse at gears for champs. Like, we needed to be better at gears at our second regional, but then from our second regional to champs, we could get worse. And we knew at champs, both Einstein alliances were going to get that 4-rotor. It was going to be tied, and it was going to come down to who shot more balls. And that's when we did all of our shooter iterations. Aaron Hill will make fun of me for this next point, but this is where this bottom point ties into the top one. I've got a group of teams I'm buddies with, and Aaron Hill's one of the guys in that group, and we talked the whole season. And we pretty much ran our prototype shooter for regionals, and it worked well. And we had some thoughts of things you would do to make that shooter better. One was a foam-lined hood, one was a softer flywheel, and another was adding a smaller flywheel in front of that. We let everyone else do that. And we took their regional data of their percentage accuracy before and after they made those changes on as many of those teams we could get data for to quantify which of those changes were worth it. And we actually found an interesting trend of it was pretty easy to get 60% ball accuracy in 2017. And then whichever of those 3 updates you did the first, I'm not making these numbers up, but they're roughly the right magnitude, you would get 20% better. And then the next one you did, you would get 15% better. I think I made these percentages too high now and it's not gonna work out. And then the last one you did, you got 5 or 10%. And we could have used that data to say, hey, let's just do two out of the 3. But we figured all 3 wasn't that hard to do. So we just did all 3. And then, we were better at shooting the champs and people were like, oh my God, it's incredible. How are you guys making so many balls? And it felt really good because we spent so much less time on our shooter than these other teams because we were intelligent about not investing in improvements in it before those improvements had a chance to pay off. Cool, I'm gonna jump to a new section now. If there's any final questions on this kind of theme of iteration.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
What do you see as the bigger teams? What do they get, the bigger teams, what do they get trapped into, in all this? Because what is your opinion about that?
Ooh, that's rough. I would say 973 probably did more of this data analysis we're talking about than a lot of the big teams because we didn't have the resources to check every box. There's a strong argument that if you have near unlimited resources, why try to figure out what's more important? Do all the things you can afford and just be better than other people. It's very expensive to be wrong about that, though. I think what's more common, and this might not have been what you're asking, and I'm sorry if that's the case, you've got some really good teams like 1114 with Karthik, Citrus Circuit 1678 with Mike Corsetto, where you have people that have better intuition than I do, and they can do this stuff with less data, and they can make pretty much subjective decisions about what's going to be critical or not. If you're asking about what kind of mechanisms teams get locked into, I'm sorry, can you phrase? I think I totally lost your question.
Yeah, you're talking about over time, you're wanting to hold off till till other teams do it so you can learn from their mistakes. What do you see big teams that have resources? What trap do they fall under? Either they go all in for it too early, or they wait too late, or what do you think about that? Does that make any more sense?
That makes perfect sense. And I'm sorry, I think I gave you a helpful answer to the wrong question. I think the former is far more common. You'll see teams spend too much resource too early because they can afford it, and then it's some combo of an impact to them of, they squandered some competitive advantage by letting the cat out of the bag earlier in season. They made it easier for their opponents to pre-scout and say, hey, this team is currently X good. I think they're only going to be X plus 10% champs. It's kind of nice if everyone knows there's this arms race feature, but they have no idea what level you're going to show up at. And then they're kind of stressing out of man, how fast do our can grabbers have to be? I think it's pretty rare for the bigger teams to miss the important feature. And it's also pretty easy, even for, as you get into the more middle tier teams. Let's say maybe they skipped a climb in 2018 and they wanted to add a single robot climb so they could climb with another robot, where each robot grabbed the bar and went up. If your robot was completely done and that was the only feature you were adding after you saw regionals play out and you were going to champs, that'd be pretty easy to do. Whereas on kickoff day, it would have been pretty hard to analyze and decide exactly if that would have been a good use of your team's resources. Is that more in line with what you were asking?
Yeah, that was a good question. And I guess I have a follow-up question.
Sure.
Do you see 971 having that issue?
971 doesn't always go for some of these features, like the shot blocker. I guess you kind of went for the multi-climb. You committed early to that, and then that worked, so you were right. There's always a counterpoint. spending resources on something early isn't universally bad. It's just more expensive if you're wrong. I would say generally your team does commit, and this is going back many slides, but it's a similar theme, to an architecture that's harder to iterate. And I don't know if it's a cultural decision to iterate less past that point, or because you generally get your robots done a little later in season and your architectures are harder to iterate, you iterate them less. But there's definitely some good data points of you making pretty effective ones within those constraints. Like your 2016 climb, I thought was very well implemented and snuck right in and worked well. And there was no downsides to it that I saw as a spectator. Geez, I can't even remember you guys changing in 2017. I don't want to ruffle any feathers.
We changed our gear slot.
Well,
we changed the gear slot 5 times in 2017.
Oh, then that blows away my point. I was going to say you should have changed your gear slot to be better, but you changed it 5 times. So it's unfair to say change it 6 times and get it right.
So I was a student on 971, graduated in 2014. I've been a mentor since then. And when I was a student on the team, we didn't have the resources to iterate. Almost all of our complex parts were made by sponsors, and they had a couple week lead times, so we couldn't iterate. So we designed to not have iterations. Since then, we've gotten some resources that will allow us to make parts in-house, and we could iterate faster, but I'm not sure that our culture has caught up with that yet.
That's a great point. There's a lot of insight there. And that really lines up well with that last slide that's a little out of place in that robot simplicity section of there's so much value in putting your team in a position where you can make things quicker and you can iterate things quicker so that it's available as an option. Yeah, I didn't even reason through the point you're making of you're right. A lot of teams don't even have the option to iterate once they hit a certain point in season for various reasons.
Thank you for answering my question.
No worries.
I have a question, Adam, on this one. You're talking about sort of in the arms race, you don't want to show your best tech too early. I think a flip side of that is that it's kind of cocky to think that you can walk into a regional without having tested anything, without having a competition experience with something. So how do you balance out that it's great to have gone out of your last regional with a solid run of all that technology. That it's you're in a good spot. It's all battle tested and battle hardened. You're in a good spot for a chance from that verse. Now you've showed your best tech at one event early.
Yeah, I mean there's no right answer there, obviously. I think a lot of these years there's merit to just showing a lesser version of the same thing, and you're not letting the cat out of the bag there at all. Things like the shot blockers in 2014 could kind of go either way. Some teams at champs like 973, we could actually articulate an arm out that wasn't well designed, but we could do it in front of the goal and block stuff. That was new and novel. We didn't want to show that early. 1114 did a similar thing by driving out of the goal. I guess you got to make the decision just based on how competent your team is at doing effective integration and practice at home and having that scale to events. And if you're, mature and realistic with your assessment, like your last couple seasons as a rolling average, if you've tried to implement things at events, at least if you haven't, it would be hard to do so. Is a great data set to determine, hey, we do XYZ at home and it works great, and we get to events and it doesn't work great. So clearly there's something missing with our preparation process, or no, you've got a good track record of stuff that you make at home, never fielded it before, run it at champs for the first time, and it works well. As an outsider with very limited data, your 2016 climb seemed like it just worked, and I'm sure you practiced that at home the reasonable amount, and then you got the champs and it wasn't an issue. So I don't know, that one kind of falls down to making good decisions, which is kind of a cop-out.
Yeah, I guess we could trust the process a little bit on that, and you're right that we probably have the expertise to be able to do something well implemented at home and translate it through.
Yeah, and there's definitely a risk there. You're talking to the person that, among other things that went badly, part of why 973 and 254 lost in 2015 is we were so focused on those can grabbers that we were not making a lot of other decisions well, and we were not having certain conversations, and we didn't put ourselves out there in a good spot to be competitive. And then I made bad decisions on top of that. But a big part of that is we went way too far into this arms race. And now that I've done that, I feel like I would make a more calibrated and better decision going forward. But we definitely played that wrong. We got a question in chat, maybe. Yeah, Steve's making a point about trying stuff at the off season. I think that is definitely valid, and it's better to iterate and test things in the off season. Just be aware of what's different, both pros and cons between off season and season before you try to use that data to justify something in season. Generally teams are going to meet less in the off season, so in some ways there's a chance to be less successful and prove that you can't be as good as you might be. But you also have more runway and less pressure, so there's a chance to be more successful in the off season and prove perhaps that you should bite off more than you can chew. I don't know. A lot of this comes back to make good decisions on data, which I know is tough, but it's better than making good decisions off of nothing. All right, so we don't have a huge amount of time left, but I'm going to talk about case studies a little bit. And this is something we would kind of do as homework with the 973 kids. And it was mostly to develop the ability to do a smell test where, okay, I looked at a bunch of different games. We did mock kickoffs. I looked at the best and or the most simple robots from those years. I looked at robots from teams that had similar resources to us. And now I've got this good data set in my head of like kickoff, game breakdown, robots, kickoff, game breakdown, robots. Now, when you get into the current year, you're just going to have kickoff and then the in-the-moment game breakdown. You don't have the advantage of looking back and adjusting your game breakdown to be perfect. But you should still have some ability to kind of do a smell test of like, okay, we looked at 10 seasons and we just did this kickoff and we came up with this list, and like the robot I'm looking on the whiteboard is like 3 times more complicated than any of these robots we're looking at in the last 10 years. And there's a chance that is right, but it probably isn't. Another thing to do in these kickoff studies, although you only get to do it once per student per year, is like, do that mock kickoff and come up with that priority list of, things you absolutely have to be competitive, and then just embarrass everyone when you show what the true, lesser priority list was of all the teams on Einstein that were able to be, obviously Einstein level competitive with less, features than what you thought based on, kickoff. So to cheat a little bit, here's a really rough breakdown of like, this is, the advantage of hindsight, what you really needed to be competitive in 2013. So, skipping things like drivetrain, et cetera, which, hopefully you got from Karthik's presentation. You needed the 10-point climb. You needed the ability to run back to the human player, get slots, come back, shoot them. And then you actually didn't need anything else. You want to add a little more on it. If you could be less than 30 inches tall, and this will all make more sense if you go back and watch the game video, that would let you drive around a little better on the field. You could put some wheels or stuff on it so that when you went to the human loader, you could pull those Frisbees out faster. Then you could have a floor intake that would pass actually to the same mechanism you're human loading with. And that's a key difference than like having a fully integrated floor intake. I guess what I should have done to provide a little more context is there were way more things you could have done in 2013. Like there was this 20-point climb, there was a 30-point climb. There was like once you've done this 30-point climb up this complicated metal assembly, you could dump disc on the top of that. You could, pick up Frisbees from the floor at any point in the match. And a lot of teams thought they had to do all of those things to be super competitive. And it's why it's one of the best years to go back and look for these mock kickoffs. So some rough trends for these robots we're about to look at. Generally, the number 1 seed was a team that would shoot the 3 discs they had preloaded, and then they would pick up 4 more off the ground and shoot those. And that was just based on, you got a lot more points if you were shooting more in auto. And then the first tiebreaker after win-loss was auto points. So if I won 10 matches and you won 10 matches, but I scored more points in auto, I seeded first. So we saw a lot of teams seed first with 7 discs. And it would have been pretty easy to figure that out on kickoff. Whoever they were picking didn't need that same auto. So they didn't necessarily need that same feature set unless, independently they wanted to put themselves in good seating position. And then a little, fun factoid is pretty much every elite team made this, 7-disc floor intake team. 11-14 was one of the few elite teams that said, no, we're not going to do that. We're going to cycle back and forth with no intake, and we're going to make that 30-point climb that a lot of other teams thought was too expensive or too hard to do. And they could also dump the Frisbees in the talk, because they knew there were going to be a bunch of teams that would probably be pretty interchangeable that were putting themselves in position to be the number 1 seed, and 11-14 was just going to play with them. And they turned out to be right. At regionals, they got to play with 2056. At champs, they got to play with 118, who was a great 7-discer. So got some real quick slides here, and then the presentation's done. We're just going to look at some simple robots from 2013. And I've arbitrarily rated these on 1 to 3 for the categories that are subjective, and I'll talk through that a little bit. And then I've put raw numbers for the categories that make sense. And all these categories, if you look at them, are the ones we looked at like an hour ago or so. So 610, this robot had, a little slot in the back that frisbees would fall in. They went in like either they had a Home Depot bucket or they made a Home Depot bucket. That was the tech that year to hold frisbees in a column. And then they shot them out with the flywheel here. And this was all like on a 2D deck. And they had a little pneumatic cylinder to change the angle. So they had 2 shots. And then they had some pneumatic cylinders just to go like this to raise the robot an inch off the ground to hang. They're highlighted here because they won champs. And I don't know, there were 500 teams that made the same robot this year. And a bunch of the top 25 were this robot. Or they were this robot with extra features where the team didn't really use the extra features. Gave him a 2 out of 3 for integration. This was all kind of new at the time, doing frisbees and stuff. So it wasn't trivial, but it wasn't like they were picking up a frisbee from the floor, somehow getting that frisbee to like take a corner and end up somewhere else, and then serialize and shooting 4 frisbees. A little bit of invention. We'd never shot frisbees before. We found out that actually the shooting part was pretty easy, and the picking up and loading part was pretty hard. I think I might be off by 1 on the DOF count, but whether it's 4 or 5, that's a pretty low DOF count for FRC robots. This is a really easy robot to make, drive, control, etc. Servoed, I did 0 to 1 because a lot of teams actually just ran the motor and they made frisbees, because once you shot them a minimum speed, shooting them faster than that speed, they still shot in a straight line. So the answer, at least if that was the kind of trajectory you were doing, was like always shoot faster, because then you have that much more margin for being wrong. They didn't have any coordinated motions. That was easy. Gave him a 2 for sensitivity. We'd never shot frisbees before, so I don't know. And sorry, for some context, like these, you're rating these based on like how you would have to rate them on kickoff day, not with the knowledge we know now. Because you go back and rate robots 10 years ago, they're going to be easier to make if we already know how to make them. They didn't have any rotary joints. I guess they had a linear joint with their hang, but it was a really easy one. Nothing high force, no high force release. A little discontinuous. They had 4 frisbees in the bucket and pulled out 1 at a time. It wasn't crazy. Tuning was a 2. Once again, we hadn't shot before, so a lot of these variables are kind of coupled. They got a pretty cool behind the design if you want to look at it. And then on average, statistically, they scored 63 points a match, which for context was pretty darn good, I think. I think like the very, very best teams were doing like 75, 80 a match at champs, and there weren't many teams doing that. If you want to extend and maybe make a little more complicated robot, 1662 in 1986 really made pretty much the identical robot as 610. I mean, you look at the details and like stuff's a little different, but they both did a cute thing where they had a floor intake that just passed to their human motor. And what was really cool about that is they didn't complicate the integration of this like table stakes, really simple robot with their expanded features. So, coming out of that Karthik presentation, he'll, have you get a priority list, and then you'll have this like would be nice list of like, okay, we need up to line 7, but it'd be really nice if we get 8, 9, and 10. And then what you want to avoid is compromising 4, 5, 6, 7 or whatever in the name of getting those would be nice features, which you've certainly seen teams do probably. So both these teams were able to, guarantee the simple robot, other than, hey, people are working on this intake and there's some resources being spent on that, but still get the additional functionality. And if that additional functionality didn't pan out, whatever, the robot was done, worked really well. 1986 was a little better. They also had one of those fancy 30-point climbs at champs, so that's going to blow their OPR up a little bit. And you'll also see that 1662 actually is a full 10 points lower in OPR. They just weren't as tuned in general. It's hard to get perfect anecdotes for these presentations. If you come over here, scores are pretty much the same all across the board, although this 5 should probably be a 6 because of that intake. And then, not picking on you guys at all, but figured I'd throw you in here for context. And I don't know how many of you've seen your 2013 robot. It's pretty awesome. But the integration and invention score like almost should be a 4, like for, on a scale of 1 to 3, based on what we knew at the time. Like, man, you guys really called a difficult challenge and then nailed it, which is cool. But saying that you're going to pick up frisbees off the floor and then store them in this spiral and feed them all through and then pass them up 1 at a time at the shooter, like, that's brave on kickoff day to say, we're going to make that robot and we're going to invent all the things to make that work. I guess I skipped over. What was that?
When you get there, sequence motion is scored low here. That should be a 3.
Oh,
having
that's
worked
fair.
on this.
I missed that. Yeah, and that's pretty similar to that 254 example we were looking at for 2013. You had that same problem of this discontinuous sequence motion with frisbees that you wanted to optimize to be the smallest time, but then you're going to run into reliability issues. Maybe sensitivity and tuning should be 3 as well. I don't know. The point of this exercise isn't to get all these little spreadsheets that rank these robots over time. I just found that when I gave the 973 students something to score it with, it kind of forced them to do their homework a little more and dig deep and think about things. That's my last slide. And thank you for putting up with being the guinea pigs for doing this the first time.
Yeah, thank you, Adam, for doing this. This has been great. I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from this and take forward and do better with. Here, yeah. Anyone have any questions?
From the whole presentation, what is something that you think our team from the outside can do better on?
Ooh, well, I'll give kind of a short Mimi answer, and it's not just for your team, it's for every team. And not just for first, it's like your whole life. Opportunity cost is real. Not just, in the forward direction of, making good decisions and making sure you're spending those points on things that are going to give the most maximal value, but also it's really important when you're looking backwards and not assuming that just because something had measurably good results, that it was the optimal thing to do. It's really easy to look backwards, whether, personal life, FRC, whatever, and say like good thing happened, therefore good decision, versus bad thing happened, therefore bad decision. And obviously it's more complex than that. Something great could have happened when you made a decision where something good just happened. For a more thorough answer, I would kind of feed into what Brian was saying on iteration. I think you guys should iterate more. That's not necessarily you specifically, that's pretty much all teams, but I think on the spectrum of, let's cut out the top FRC, 25 and compare them, you're probably on the lesser side of iteration. You're pretty high on the side of technical excellence, which helps mitigate, your lesser amount of iteration for sure. But what's terrifying is if you can get a 971 that is strategized by Karthik and iterates as fast as 1678 or 973, you're never going to lose. So I would, if you want to view it of I have another presentation where I look at a bunch of different things for teams. And one graph I show is if you had a bar chart for every aspect of your team, and you could put it at whatever level you want. You got scouting, you got drive team, yada, yada, or you get really technical. We have our machining ability, we have our design ability, we have our programming. You want all those bars to be at about the same height. And you're going to compete at, some weighted average of your lowest bar. So it's always good to bring your weaknesses up because they're usually cheaper to improve and you'll get more bang for your buck when you improve those. It's more fun to focus on your strengths and you usually enjoy doing them, but there's much more diminishing returns when you focus on those.
Yeah, thank you. That answered my question great.
Oh, hi Adam, this is Ginger. I have a question about, it might be more leadership and psychology based, but the fun factor and the shiny factor is often distracting. And as a leader, how do you, or a mentor, how do you shift the team and help guide them towards one direction when sort of the current seems to be flowing in another? Like you said, a lot of this stuff makes sense after the fact and you can look back and analyze it, but it sort of seems like year after year people make these decisions that may not have been the best after the fact. So how do you do that?
So maybe one day I'll come and give the other presentation that I gave for 2135 a month and a half ago. I think the key part is don't, try to set the team up such that you're not making those decisions during season, which sounds like a cop-out, but I think there's a lot to that. So I think there's a pretty chronic tension on a lot of teams of, there's 3 things you're probably balancing. Educational outcomes for the students, on-field competitiveness, and then cool factor. I think it's important, I think it's critical for teams in the fall to agree on what the mix of those outcomes should be. Obviously, you can't say we're going to do 100% in one and 0% in the other two, because like you really can't do any of them without the other ones. And then I think you want to dig deeper with examples and actually talk in the fall as a team how you might decide certain conflicts that come up classically in seasons. You know, cooler robot, shinier robot. Maybe we're a week out from the event and we're not ready. Do we, you know, I think a pretty classic thing you see is maybe you run a smaller shop with just your best kids. You'll often hear people say, man, we got so much more done. We didn't have everyone else here. You know, that can be true. And in moderation, that's an effective thing to do. But those small shops with just the best kids in the team are not good for the team long term. They're going to burn those kids out more. They're going to make the kids that feel left out potentially more left out. I'm kind of going way too deep on this answer for you. But, you know, talk through in the fall, how does your team want to make those decisions? And try to go through as many as you can and get people on the same page then. So that during season, you're not arguing about the specifics of the decision. You're more so beating people over the head with the goals that you already agreed on. Like, hey, like this is the case we talked about in the fall. And I think we are not making a decision in line with the trade-offs we agreed on before season. You still have some work to do because someone might be saying, no, this isn't as shiny as you think it is. And you're like, no, this is crazy. That's more than we should be doing. But at least the argument's more constrained. You know, when people, what was that?
I was going to say, I think something that I can like sort of speak about, like as when I was a student, I sort of, I guess, felt that like for me, like the software side was something I didn't fully understand. So I always thought that was like fairies. Obviously, that would be like Austin and the software team would come sort it out. And so I think like another thing that may be helpful is actually learning more about what all the aspects are required. Like you mentioned, it's like the whole team. And I think for me, I think I also missed like sort of what were some of the other parts that actually needed to happen. I didn't realize as a student.
And then not quite what you asked, but I think it's something I learned over the years and, you know, changed my behavior on is 973 was a small team. We didn't have a lot of mentors. I would say on average, the students were, you know, less primed over their life to be as effective speakers and advocators as a lot of the students I'm seeing on teams up here. So if I wanted to, I could win every argument, every discussion, just because I was louder and could do so. And, you know, other people are in a similar case, maybe not because they're louder, but just because they have such respect from the rest of the team. And I think those people should try to be aware as possible of how much they are influencing their position, influencing decisions, you know, either just with their reputation or with, you know, unfair arguing techniques, and try not to do that. You know, it's easy to say like, we need these can grabbers on the robot for us to win. So like, I'm going to cheat and I'm going to be a jerk and I'm going to win this argument because I know it's right for the team. But, you know, you're doing a little damage when you do that. And ideally you never do it, but otherwise I would minimize it. And, you know, the more you can get decisions made on consensus or, you know, hey, you know, raise the flag and say, we need to do these can grabbers. And I'm going to sit here and explain like why they make sense. And we'll go through all that and not, you know, just bully through and get the decision made. And I'm not saying that because I like know people on your team that have done it. I'm just saying that as a general thing that I've run into, and I'm sure is true across all teams in some form or another. And it's not just the mentors either. It could be students that have more prestige or anything.
Thanks.
No worries.
I actually think it's good for the students to realize that happens in real life too, not just in FRC.
Yeah, absolutely.
I was going to say earlier that year, but this robot didn't make it the championship. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yeah, I mean, I would also caution, you know, once again, like, you know, good thing happened, therefore good decisions. I don't think your 2013 robot is exceptionally out of line with, you know, robots 971 made on both ends of it. That did qualify. But I'm also the one here telling you guys you should make things simpler. So maybe I shouldn't argue with myself.
So actually, as long as we're talking about 2013, when I look back at it, I see a couple things that went wrong with that particular robot that aren't necessarily lesson to draw about the kind of stuff you talked about in this presentation. One thing that happened was I think it was broken for much of the competition season and we didn't notice. One of the rollers had split apart and it was probably like that for a while before we noticed it in the off season. The other thing that happened was the Frisbees would get jammed in the intake because there was a place the Frisbees could get stuck where they weren't touching any rollers, and they tended to get stuck there, which it's kind of a rule that I've come to appreciate since then, of you never want your game piece not touching moving things inside your robot. But it wasn't the complexity of the shooter that really brought it down.
Sure. I think the key thing to be aware of there is like a lot of this stuff, each thing in isolation isn't wrong or wasn't too expensive or any of that. But if you can shave down the total complexity some, your team is going to have more bandwidth and more talent free to attack all of those issues and solve them more effectively. And for the level you're trying to compete at, you're not shooting for works or doesn't work. You're shooting for works better than everyone else. So you need those resources free to really drive things to the point where like jamming's not a thing. It just doesn't happen on your robot.
The unregulated 12-volt solenoid power causing pistons not to fire when they're supposed to also contributed significantly to jamming.
Sure, and I would put the same argument back though of like those technical issues, you would have more bandwidth to solve if the robot was less complex. And once again, I'm not passing any judgment. I'm just saying like that is the universal theme here. If you got more time free because you had less things to do, you're probably going to solve your problems more effectively.
Yep, and also that robot was really hard to iterate on because everything is so close together and it's hard to even get your hands in there, let alone make new parts that put something in a different place because there's no space in there. And that definitely, when you mention that applies to this robot very much.
Yeah, and the architecture is really integrated too. So like if someone had a better shooter or a better intake, you didn't have much ability to leverage that because the interface between each of your systems is really determined by all your other systems here. So like you could only copy or change in the form of what was already there. And you couldn't make larger improvements. I don't want to say improvements, that makes it sound more negative, but you get what I'm saying probably. Cool, well thanks again for having me. And let me know when this gets recorded. I'm excited that this made me finally do it so we can share it out.
Yeah, thanks, Adam, and thanks 971 for including us.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.